90% of our lives are actually spent in buildings, whether this is working, learning, playing, or even resting. And this is no different for the African context. The real estate sector has been experiencing tremendous growth, both in terms of property development as well as foreign investment. Financing and information technology have paved way for some of the most interesting innovations we've seen around. And these can be commonly referred to as property technology or PropTech. Examples of this have featured in smart land registry systems, smart buildings, which can now collect data and even do reporting. Information sharing is becoming more common today than before. The presence of social media, the presence of other forms of media that can connect market players is proving to really break down the barriers of entry into the real estate sector. Narrowing down in green buildings, green development is a niche in the property sector, which is gaining a lot of momentum. The combination of transparency and these property technologies are what green buildings are all about. They help systematize the way buildings are developed and managed in the long run. So green buildings carry with them great value propositions, all the way from the raw materials in your forests to the buildings themselves. And there have been a lot of investments from particularly wild efforts. The IFC, which is the International Finance Corporation, has put across tools that can help property developers and other stakeholders in the building industry to streamline development and management of green buildings. Examples of these are the LEAD and EDGE programs. And that's why we're here today. The conversation will be centered around sustainable buildings, climate change, and energy efficiency. In the house, we have a very experienced trio who will be helping us break down the questions. Are green buildings really justifiable, both from an environmental perspective, financial, and social aspects? So the conversations are built out to take advantage of discussions here in the plenary. We have questions and polls for you to also take part in, as well as breakout rooms. We would want to create these think tanks for practical ideas that you as a professional in the energy industry can contribute to the betterment of the industry in Africa. So I'm therefore requesting for your participation and engagement with your colleagues. It might be your first time meeting, or you might have seen these faces before, but please feel free to engage with the audience, with your other members in the group. So welcome, my name is Warren, and this is the 6th Energy Professionals Roundtable. Our guest list is, again, packed with these 3 professionals, mainly in the areas of green buildings, sustainability, and climate change. We're joined by Dr. Angela Mwanda, Otieno Nickson Otieno, and Chilufya Lombe. It's going to be an interesting conversation, so hold on, and we're going to get started very soon. Before we get there, I'd just like to welcome Ruth, who is our tech person, to take us through some of the ground rules before we get started. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you, Warren. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So I'll take us through the ground rules. Ensure you have sufficient data that will sustain you all through the meeting. And then kindly avoid disruption, noise, and movement in your background, and just identify a quiet place for the meeting. Kindly also rename yourself with 2 of your official names. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to each participant, and we are also live on Facebook. Reach out in case of any reservations. Avoid logging in with 2 devices, as this will cause an echo when you speak. Kindly stay muted throughout the meeting unless asked to speak. If you want to ask a question or make any comments, raise your hand and I will identify you and unmute you. The chat box will be available during the meeting for any questions and any comments. Back to you, Warren.
Thanks, Ruth. Well put out. And so, the World Energy Celebrations are held worldwide every year in October. Here in Kenya, Area of Energy and Innovators Limited are organizing the World Energy Day conference in 2020. The event will be held virtually between 21st and 23rd of October, so you can have that marked in your calendars. And the theme for the event will be the future of energy in Africa: innovation, efficiency, and interoperability. That's the event that we're all culminating towards. Today, we are speaking about green buildings as a build-up to this conference where we shall gather once more to deliberate all that we've discussed through the year in this conference. So without further ado, I'll head over and introduce our first speaker. I know he's been waiting. And the topic of discussion will be the status of green buildings in Africa, as well as an overview of green building certifications. Green buildings are a relatively new concept in Africa, since tools are now being developed and more projects are being proposed and actually being executed within the continent. So about the speaker for this topic, Mr. Chilufya Lombe, he's a director at Solid Green Consulting. Chilufya is a mechanical engineer with over 10 years experience in green buildings and energy efficiency in particular. His key focus is on reducing energy demand in buildings in order to improve utilization of this often constrained grid power from the utilities in the African continent. His key experiences include being the lead consultant for development of technical aspects of building energy efficiency code in Nigeria, and writing the energy modeling protocol guidelines used in the Green Building Council of South Africa. The South African Green Building Council has a Green Star rating system, which Chilufya has greatly contributed towards its development. So Chilu, without further ado, take it away.
I should unmute myself. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invite. This is a very interesting forum for webinars, which I think I haven't really had much experience in, but I'm really looking forward to it. I wasn't sure if this part is where it's just for an introduction or just to kickstart the general discussions.
Okay, so the conversation is around giving us an overview of the status of green buildings in Africa, even from your experience, and also giving us an idea of some of the certifications that exist. We've mentioned LEED and EDGE just as an overview, but maybe you can also dig deeper into a few of the nitty-gritty.
Okay, I've just turned off my video because I'm having a slight technical issue, but I'll turn it back on shortly. I think maybe I can start with a bit of a journey, or the journey that I've had in green buildings from the beginning, and that'll sort of also give you an idea of how the movement has grown. And I think the first issue that you can always have with green buildings is that I think the name nowadays really makes people think that it implies a certain thing, So we always have these discussions around, is green buildings justifiable, and because it always creates these notions in people's heads that it's more expensive. And I think that for me is probably the most important part of this discussion that we need to have, is because my question always is that, what is justifiable? you know. And a lot of times what green building does is that it exposes the inherent bad practices that have become commonplace within buildings. So, you know, because the professional that is coming and saying, guys, we can't do this or we can't do that, is the green building professional, then it seems like it's a green building element when it actually isn't. You know, green buildings are really about performance, and performance in buildings can be achieved without spending a significant amount of money. So as far as green buildings go, though, you know, I think there's the idea of buildings that perform very well, and then there's certification. And those two things are often, you know, they have to be separated. You know, we say that we are sustainability consultants first, and certification is something where if a client wishes to go the extra mile and get the, you know, the plaque or the official notification that it's a green building, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can only be green if you're certified. So as we speak now, I'm going to speak a little bit about the history of certification, but you know, that history is not really where green buildings started. You know, buildings have been sustainable for centuries, and in fact, they probably have just started to get less and less sustainable as time went on. Because if you go right back to the beginning, you know, buildings were there to just have, they were purely functional. You know, it was for shelter, it was for so that you could do particular things. Right now, we make buildings, and the buildings are, you know, the aesthetic plays a very big part, regardless about whether or not the aesthetic meets the requirements of the buildings and all of that. So I worked on the first green building that was done in South Africa. So it was also probably the first certified green building on the continent, which was called Nedbank Phase 2, which is a building here in Johannesburg in Sandton. Now, the green building certification system that was used for that particular building is called Green Star. Green Star is a certification system that originated from Australia, and it was adapted for South Africa by the Green Building Council of South Africa. And within that, now you can have a Green Star certified building anywhere in Africa using the same certification system. What happens is that for each country, you do an adaptation based on the local conditions. But so Kenya actually has a green building society, or Kenya Green Building Society, and it makes use of the Green Star system. We've actually had a few buildings that are certified in Kenya now, in collaboration with a local partner called Web Limited. So there's a Service School in Runda, which has got a recent Green Star certification. There's Dunhill Towers, but Green Star is only one certification system. So there's also, I think, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, the EDGE certification system, which is developed by the IFC. That's also in prominent use across Africa, including in Kenya. I think I don't know what we call you, the MC or the first presenter, also mentioned LEED, which is an American green building system. So all these certification systems, really, there's a lot of different ones, but they all focus and talk about the same things when it comes to environmental performance. So that first building was in 2008, I think 2008, 2009. It was actually my first job out of varsity, and I ended up in the engineering company that had a green building department. And you know, we had to figure out this new thing called energy modeling, and we did it on that project. And since then, Green Star has grown significantly on the continent and in South Africa. After about a year and a half, 2 years, we myself and a co-worker decided to start our own business, and we started Solid Green Consulting. And in that time now, we're currently on 99 green building certifications, and that's primarily Green Star, but also some edge buildings in there, some LEED buildings. You know, what we generally find is that people often focus a lot on the certification and not on the sustainability of buildings. So our process really starts with looking at sustainability and performance of the building. If you get that right, certification is always easy. And as you go through this journey, you'll hear a lot of horror stories about people who've tried to get buildings certified, and then they've run into a lot of problems. And it can almost all be rooted back to the fact that the buildings, to start with, the designs and the process is not optimized and it's not sustainable in itself. So you start to work backwards. You know, the best example is around air conditioning, and in Kenya in particular. You know, Nairobi's got a fantastic climate. Nairobi is the best climate for passive design that you can get anywhere in the world, you know? But what we find a lot of times is that it's either you have a building that has no air conditioning and therefore is going to be very, very energy efficient, or you have a building that has got too much air conditioning and not much in between. So you'll find that if you're in a climate that presents all of this opportunity, but then you design a facade, for instance, that is very uncomfortable, that is going to need a lot of energy for people inside to stay cool, then you haven't taken advantage of it. So because green buildings are about performance, if we say we want your energy use to be X number per kilowatt hours per square meter, and you've got a bad building, you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get it to that performance. Meanwhile, the main problem is that from first principles, you've designed the wrong type of building in the right type of place, you know? The problem is the same in any climate. You know, we've got a project in Accra now where we're trying to say to the team that this is the wrong type of design for this climate, you know? You've got a highly glazed building in a climate that is very, very hot, you know? So you're going to make it very difficult for your building to perform. So those elements are really the ones that we find that are the crux of the matter. If you solve that, green buildings actually should save you money. And the reason that they don't quite often is because the design of buildings is just not optimized in a way that can happen. So all these green building certifications at the moment, basically what it all does is that there's a baseline, which is based on what is typically done in an area, and then there's where you want to go. And because we are speaking about energy, we'll only talk about energy, even though green buildings are a very holistic thing. You know, it's not just what you're doing in energy or in water, it's how have you built, where have you built, what conditions have you created. So green buildings is a very holistic thing, and we are talking about one element of green buildings. But within that, you know, there's a new certification system, or there's a new method of looking at certification called net zero. And that is probably the most stringent and the most ambitious green building certification you can go for. Now, if you go and look at Green Star, you have to understand how the baseline works. You have to understand that you have to make a percentage improvement over the baseline, and there's all of these very many different things that go into it. But if you look at net zero, and what net zero is that it just looks at over a whole year, your energy use should be zero, which means that you should offset whatever you use. Now, what that does is that it puts into focus not how you offset, not solar or whatever you're going to be able to do to offset, but it puts into focus what you use. Because the only way you can make that particular certification work is by drastically reducing what you use. And that's one of the places where certification is really great in terms of pushing performance and pushing the industry to a place where you normally wouldn't have gotten to. And what we found over the last 10 years working in green buildings is that the other rating systems, you know, industry is sort of, it's plateaued. You know, they started out being a challenge and it's now what everybody does. So it's fairly easy to deliver them once your market understands what needs to be done and optimizes itself for it. But this is now the next step. And this also is the step that us, in Africa, we actually need, because one, the concept of running your own buildings is not that new in Africa. I mean, most countries have got a constrained grid of some kind. So Kenya probably less than a lot of other countries, but having to run your own building off either most normally like a generator is not a new thing. But the idea that you can reduce that significantly by looking at energy efficiency and looking at how your building performs is what's new. And what we've started to talk a lot about is the idea of this energy leapfrog. Africa needs an energy leapfrog. So most of us, an example of leapfrogging is that if you look at telecommunications, right? The history of telecommunications is from when you start with Alexander Graham Bell and you move on to all the different technologies that happened before cell phones, right? But most African countries skipped maybe 2 or 3 iterations of telecommunications technology and just ended up on cell phones, So most places didn't have a network of landlines in every house and all of those type of things. So when it comes to energy, as our cities start to get built, we are looking for ways of saying, we want to not take the example of the West where you first build a massive portfolio of inefficient buildings and then start to fix them. The bulk of what we need to do hasn't been built yet. So what we then want to do is say we want to skip over this entire generation of badly performing buildings and only start to build the absolute best that we can from a sustainability perspective. But also if you bring into play considerations around climate change, it's very unfortunate for Africa that we have to build our cities at a time when the climate is under attack. So as much as we need development, the development has to be done in such a way that we also look at the mitigation around climate change. So net zero carbon buildings are exactly that. If we get more and more buildings on that path, which is really a path around extreme energy efficiency. And just to give you an idea, a typical green building aims to be 30 to 40% lower than the industry benchmark, than what you typically do. And a net zero building has to be 40 to 60% lower than that particular building in terms of energy efficiency. So you're looking at 60 to 70% reduction in the energy that you have to offset in the first place, which is quite a significant change, but it's not impossible. So certification, in summary, is something that can be used to push an industry towards where we need to be, but it's not the end all and be all by any stretch of the imagination in terms of what we need to be doing and where we need to be going. Performance is what's important. And once you have great performance in your building, it becomes easier to deal with things like certification. And that's where, a lot of the recognition and the advocacy then goes in terms of being able to inspire the rest of the industry. I think that's my 10 minutes.
Yep. Thanks for that, Chilu. That's very informative. That we need to leapfrog the green building development from not following the legacy development paths, but jump straight into adopting the best industry standards. I just had a question for you, which was, where should green building concepts be adopted? At what stage in the real estate or property development stage? Is it at the design phase? Because there are also buildings that already have been constructed and people are now looking back at getting certifications. Which place proves the best value for money for investing into green initiatives and green efficiency?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, probably our most common question, and to be honest, it has to be as early as possible. These considerations have to be done before any lines are drawn on paper. The earlier you do it, the easier it is to implement. Our typical process that we find that happens is that a client wants to build a building. The first person he goes to is most likely an architect. So he starts to tell the architect what he wants, and then the architect draws some pictures for them, and then ultimately they approve it as a concept. When they approve the concept, they start to bring in other professionals. Now, by then, it's very likely that you've missed all the easy items that you can do within your building, because no benchmarks or analysis or work has been done around sustainability goals. So ideally, a client should have a brief that already encompasses sustainability, so that when the architect starts to look at it, even though there are no other professionals on board, they understand what the client wants. So typically what will happen is that we get onto a project and we say, here's our target for energy efficiency. And then we look at the concept that has already been approved. And that's always the problem, is that it's already been approved by the client, which means that if we go and we said, your building is highly glazed, so we need to add some shading, they're going to say, it's too late for us to add shading because the client board has already approved this. And the irony is that the client assumes all of these things have been done when you show him your picture. So if the architect shows him a picture of a building, he's assuming that this building is going to be comfortable, it's going to be within budget, it's going to be energy efficient. And unfortunately, all he's been given is a picture that hasn't had any overlay of performance targets onto it. So the earlier the better. The later it goes, then the less that you can do. So typically what would happen is that you'll find that within a highly glazed building, you'll then say, okay, you can't add shading, you can't change the size of the glass. The only thing you can do is put very expensive double glazing. So now it'll look like that building was expensive because it needed to have expensive double glazing, but that wasn't really the case. The reality is that early on, someone should have said, if you have a design like this, it's going to be very expensive because you need better glass. And if the architect would then have drawn a building with shading, smaller windows, that sort of thing, it would make it much easier for them to be able to reach the performance goals. And that's what's important about having a performance goal. You have to get there, and the method can be different.
Yeah, thanks for that. The earlier the better, and we need to set the performance benchmarks as early as possible so that we establish a sustainable way of and an economic way of green buildings. Thanks, Chilufya.
Yeah.
Our next speaker, the next topic that we'll be talking about is green building materials and building management for sustainability. So we're looking at managing these green buildings right from the start all the way into their life cycle from the point of view of energy, water, and emissions. Our guest speaker is Otieno Nickson Otieno, the CEO at NIKO Green. Nickson Otieno is a green architect and sustainability expert committed to promoting the design and development of sustainable, low-carbon buildings. He is the founder and CEO at NIKO Green and a partner at Trine Architects Limited. Nickson has over 5 years experience lecturing, having served as a part-time lecturer at the Technical University of Kenya and Kenya Institute of Highways and Building Technology. He is a member of the Architectural Association of Kenya, under the Governing Council, and a secretary of the AAK's Environmental Design Consultants Chapter. Nickson has consulted for the Government of Kenya and United Nations on green buildings, clean energy, and environmental education. For the past 8 years, Nickson has been spearheading the development of green buildings, green rating tools, as the coordinator and consultant of Green Africa Foundation's Green Mark Standard for green buildings, as well as a member of the technical committee of AAK's Safari Green Building Index. I'd be interested to hear more about this Safari Green Building Index, but for now, welcome Nickson, Let's hear more from what you have for us.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I would like to build on the ground that has been set by Lombe. I think as he has already mentioned that actually certification is not the end goal of the green building. This certification is actually a way of putting a seal on work that has already been done so that you avoid the element of greenwashing. Now we have people naming their buildings green, which does not necessarily mean they are green, but they really want to associate with those credentials. So I think Lombe mentioned about the context in Africa and globally. We talked about LEED and we talked about Green Star South Africa that is being contextualized for application in other African countries, including Kenya, under the efforts of KBBS. But I would also like to bring to the attention of our participants that as Kenya, also we have local green building rating tools that have gone through a very rigorous process of development, of course, benchmarking from the best of tools available there in the market, over 15 tools that have been looked at. So we have already a green mark rating tool that was developed under the support of the Ministry of Environment and Housing through Green Africa Foundation with funding from UNDP. This tool is already in place and a manual for its application is already available. It should be on the rollout immediately. The Architectural Association of Kenya, which is a member organization that champions the interests of the built environment, including professionals, all the professionals from architects to all the cadres of engineers and landscape designers and project managers and quantity surveyors, have also been developing a tool that is called Safari Green Building Index. This is at the final stage. It has been finalized. It's pending approval by the Governing Council of AAK so that it can be rolled out for application. So I think having made reference to the international tools, I would like us also to be aware that we have local tools that can be used for certifying green buildings. Question, of course, is why would you need a local tool when you have the Green Star, the age, the LEED standards that have all been applied in Kenya? Of course, this is a marketplace. These tools are excellent, but you also have our specific unique context. So, for example, I will give you a case. If you're looking at LEED, talking a lot about brownfield development, when you're looking at the category of sites, sustainable planning of sites, or talking about cycling and motorized transport, those are very ambitious goals which we need to aspire. But if you look at our context, we are not going to penalize the developers for not having a cycling lane when even the streets have not been provided with non-motorized transport facilities. We are not going to talk about brownfield development actually when we don't have a lot of those sites that need to be reclaimed. So we needed to look at our specific context. You will find that some of these tools put a lot of emphasis on energy, and more energy they're putting our emphasis from the point of equipment, appliances. But in our context, we realize that we, yes, need to focus on energy, but not necessarily from appliances perspective, but from optimizing the design, using passive strategies, what Lombe has just made reference to, that our climatic condition is very conducive, that you can be able to actually design a building that does not need any mechanical ventilation to support this operation, unless it is a specialized building like a hospital or a factory, those highly specialized building like a theater room that you don't need to really allow in light, so you have certain limitations. So those are things that we needed to contextualize in our country to be able to ensure that, of course, we are having the aspiration to be have the best practices at the global level, but we need to also align ourselves with our local realities, both culturally, climate-wise, and also in our economic status. We also don't want to promote materials, if you're talking about building materials, where we actually more supporting the, the global trade, materials coming left, right, and center, and not really supporting our local economy. So to that extent, we believe that the local tools will play a bit of a role in terms of championing the local interest. But of course, that does not mean that we have no leeway to really promote at large scale the adoption of the other international rating systems. All of these have a place and they have a role. I would give you a case of US. US have more than 30 tools that are applying. Apart, most people know about the LEED, but they have a lot of other tools that are in place. So if you're looking at, well, for example, WELL standard is largely focusing on the health approach to grid building. you have Green Globe, you have other tools that are state-based. So in Kenya, we would be open to really use as many as possible. But at the moment, we have 2 local rating tools. And also we have 3 international rating systems that have been contextualized for operation in Kenya. So this effort being championed by Kenya Green Building Society, Green Africa Foundation, and Architecture Institution of Kenya. Having said that, then let me come back to our my topic for today. I was asked to speak a little bit about building materials and building management, creating the link between sustainable or green buildings, energy efficiency, and climate change. Now, first I would like to make a remark that we do spend a lot of time, and we are alive to this fact that 90% of our time is spent in building, whether at home or at our workplace, in offices or in learning institutions or wherever it be. So it means that if we are seriously talking about climate change, abating climate change, then we seriously need to think about the building spaces, the built environment that we are living and working in. And to that extent, our topic for today is really very relevant. We can't overemphasize the linkage. And now when we talk about climate change, largely we are all aware that greenhouse gases are largely measured in terms of the emissions. Carbon emissions are related to energy use, energy consumption. And the estimates that we have is that, of course, 40% of energy consumption actually goes to the direct construction and use of buildings. But having said again that we spend 90% of our time, you may probably realize that even though we are talking about building as a sector consuming about 40% of our energy and releasing about, again, the same amount, or about 40% globally of greenhouse gas emissions. But if you go in the larger context of areas of living and working, whether you are in the hospitality sector, whether you are in the education sector, you would likely be dealing with buildings. So your emissions, those sector emissions, somehow also have indirect correlation with the built environment. Only agricultural sector, you may not draw a very strong linkage because a lot of the farming is happening in the open land. So there you have the land use and forest related emissions. But then, of course, you come to even the agriculture, they do their food processing in the factories. We do the sale of the food stuff in shops that are actually building. So I think this topic we are talking about is very important, that if we are to really address climate change, then we really need to look at how we design and how we operate and how we demolish or decommission our buildings. And that brings us to the conversation of a life cycle approach, which our moderator just alluded to. We need not to think as our buildings only begin thinking about them when we are now running them, but when we are designing them. And I would bring that conversation back to what Lombe said. At what stage do we need to take consideration? I think the consideration has to come from pre-design to post-occupation. So far, as Kenya, particularly in our context, we have this tendency to design our buildings, build them, especially the consultants. And once we have built them and handed them over, we walk away and we forget about them. So we move on quickly to the next project. I think the bigger challenge for us is also to get to hold our consultants more accountable to the buildings that they have delivered beyond their handing over the keys, the occupational certificate, so that they come back to assess how does our building perform, so that the lessons they're able to draw from these past projects can inform their subsequent projects, so that we don't carry on, the bad practices from one project to the subsequent one. And having said that, I also would like to emphasize an integrated design process. What do I mean by an integrated design process? Lombe made a case on how we traditionally actually procure consultancies for projects. That you have a client that probably would approach an architect, and then the architect would prepare their schematic conceptual designs, and then they bring on board, once the designs are pretty much refined and agreed upon by the client, they bring on board the other consultants, the services engineer, mechanical and electrical engineers, they bring the structural engineers to look at the structural elements, you bring the quantity surveyors to do the cost appraisals, and then you bring the other partners, the other consultants as may be necessary in the case. And as he rightfully said, at that point that it's very late to really make changes. So what green building, delivery of sustainable buildings towards abating climate change and promoting energy efficiency, requires that we begin thinking of an integrated design process, that you have all these consultants brought on board on the project at the beginning. So what is important would be the awareness you are raising amongst our professionals also, that the architect, okay, if I get a brief, it is important for me that at that formative stage of refining the brief with the client, we identify our team of consultants. So bring the engineers on board, bring the QAs on board, bring the planners on board, bring the EIA experts on board at the beginning, so that we formulate a collective, integrated, holistic view of that project in terms of the performance levels that we intend to achieve. And this performance, we are not only looking at the environmental, which would be energy, consumptions, or, water consumption levels, greenhouse gas emissions levels, but also the social performance parameters, how our building is going to contribute to social justice and inclusivity, so that we go together with that vision. And of course, aligning this with the cost, the budget that our clients have, because 3 elements about project delivery that are critical is: number 1, cost; number 2 is time; number 3 is quality. So often, when we talk about justifying green buildings, some people feel probably green buildings are not good because they are expensive. That is a very relative conversation, because it depends also whether you are looking at the cost of the building only at the point you have handed over the key, the building, or you're looking at the life cycle of the building. If you want to do the project that costs 5 years down the line after the building is built and people are living or using it, or you want to cost that building up to the point you're actually demolishing it or changing it over into another use. And then we have the issue of time, that, okay, for you taking me to, now we're involving more people. Is this another layer of approval? You're talking of certification. Isn't this going to delay the construction process? So our project is going to delay, and that will have actually an implication on the overall cost of the project. May we be having cost overruns because of the delays? So time is a real concern. But when we have the thinking and the great awareness among the consultant professionals, green building does not actually end up to cost you a longer time. Because the same time it would save on your time, because imagine if you engage all the consultants from the preliminary discussions with the architect, it will save you the time of back and forth that you have to revise the design. You are wasting a lot of time to, appraise the design to be able to meet certain performance criteria that should have been integrated at the beginning of the process. In fact, also even construction, some of the elements for planning for construction and project management would begin being undertaken while the design is ongoing, because you have realized that, okay, we have mapped out, we want to source our materials locally, who are our suppliers, how are we going to deal with the labor issues. This participation process needs to be planned in advance, so that even as the design is ongoing and you're waiting for the county approvals and the other statutory approvals like NEMA, NTA, you are already also working on the procurement of materials, you're doing the negotiations on the labor with the contract. So time-wise, green building actually, if well planned through an integrated process involving all from the beginning, should actually help you manage the project in a very effective way to deliver the project actually in time. And of course, last, the concern of quality. I think the level of awareness is really growing, such that we have our clientele now beginning to appreciate the value you have from a green building. I normally give a case of a building along Uhuru Highway. For some of you who drive or walk along Uhuru Highway, just opposite the Uhuru Park, you have the View Park Towers. Now, if you go to the View Park Towers, that building, there is no single day it has ever managed over 70% occupancy. Reason, because the indoor environment is really unbearable. And for you to really feel what it is, if you are walking on that Uhuru Highway during the midday, around noontime, when the sun is very high up, you will notice that you have a very strong glare, and the heat actually hitting you with the reflection coming from the building, the glazing on the building is hitting you pretty hard on the ground. And you can find even the vegetation around there is really not doing very well. But now when you have a green building that is designed not only to optimize the resources like energy, materials, water use, but also are designed to provide very good indoor air environment, very natural ventilation, sufficient air exchange, air is flowing well, you have building materials that are considered in terms of their health impacts, that they are not emitting harmful, chemicals. These have overall impact to produce, of course, studies, empirical studies have proven that working or living in a green building actually increases workers' productivity because of the thermal quality, that is, the temperature in the room, the acoustic quality, that is the noise environment, kind of noise levels within the space. You have these are very optimal. So you are able to work well, and that means many people would come. So instead of struggling with 70% of occupancy, you would have probably 90% occupancy. And also you are able to charge a premium because if you are the seller of that property, you have an extra value proposition you're making to your market. And you look at our market in a bigger picture, you realize that most of the corporates who have understood the business value for green building are actually making effort to build green, from the financial institutions, banking sectors. We have the hospitality sectors, which were early adopters through the ecotourism society's rating system. We have a number of hotels that are beginning to implement. We have the industries, the manufacturers, through the efforts that have been championed by Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the Center for Energy Efficiency, that they are really adopting, energy efficiency measures in their building. And now some of them going brave to even consider a completely green building. So the value is there in terms of those three parameters: the cost, time, and actually quality. Now, to focus more on what are we looking at when we are talking about green buildings as far as materials are concerned. Our buildings are largely a repository of materials. We have materials from the foundation to the roof of the building to the furnishing of the building. This is actually a warehouse of building materials. So when we are talking about sustainability and promoting energy efficiency towards reducing the impact of climate change, we need to consider two things. First, we have to look at the life cycle of the building, as we said from the beginning. So we need not to just make a choice of a material because it is cheap or it is easy to get now, but then we have not looked at the overall impact, overall environmental impact of that material. So when we are looking at the life cycle cost of the building, we introduce a concept that we call embodied carbon, embodied energy, and embodied carbon. So by this, we are looking at how much energy actually cumulatively has gone into the production of this particular building material. So I give you a case in example. If as the architect, the consultants for the building, we had an option to specify for a wall element, or let me take structural element, that we had an option to consider between using a concrete pillar vis-a-vis using a steel pillar. If we are only making the decision in terms of the environmental footprint, the carbon content and the energy efficiency of those two materials, what would we be looking at? We'll be looking at the concrete. Yes, we have a bit of steel and we have cement. Now, if you look at the cement, we want to analyze this cement. It was extracted, the raw material limestone was extracted somewhere. It was moved to the factory process. Then it was packed into cement. It came to site. And then on the site, you had a number of factors and materials, labor, energy is used, not only in the extraction, in the processing, manufacturing of the material, but also even in the actual mixing of the concrete and getting it to be fitted into the building. The same, you will do the analysis for the steel. You have to extract the ores, from whatever, mining process you come, you get to the factory, you have to do probably smelting, you have to use a lot of energy to be able to produce the steel. And at the end of the life cycle of the building, which one are you able to, reuse with ease? So you want to look at how much energy goes into a particular material, and that will give you the embodied carbon. While you are doing that, actually a calculation, you will also be analyzing other factors that are not necessarily, extraction, manufacturing, construction process, but sourcing. So of course, with green building, we largely encourage the use of local materials. That has a great effect in terms of powering the local economy, but from an environmental perspective, encouraging locally sourced materials has a great impact in terms of improving the efficiency of the built environment, the carbon emissions from the built environment. Because look, when you have a ceramic tile that many of our Kenyans now like the Chinese cheap, the ones imported from China, and we have many factories that are actually making very good quality ceramic tiles in Kenya. Now, if you look at the ceramic tiles made from China, probably the Chinese extracted some of the raw materials from another country and they shipped them to China. They did their processing of the materials, spending energy on transport, to take them to China, process them, and then we're spending a lot also of energy on transport to bring them back to Kenya. If you calculate the cumulative emissions by just the transport of this within the supply chain for that particular ceramic tile, one tile you are buying from China or from Italy, if you compare the tile you are buying from Kenya, maybe from Saj Ceramic or from Ingo or from whichever tile manufacturer in Kenya, you realize that you are saving a lot. You are contributing so much more in terms of energy efficiency. So we would look at locally, we would promote locally sourced materials as far as they are affordable and they are, of course, also of good quality. And then we also want to encourage reuse of materials to promote recycling of materials. Why is recycling important? As we have already said, that materials, if you just look at a square foot of ceramic tile, or one foot of a steel bar, in it there is a lot of energy that has gone, as you said. So now, if you reuse materials, if I reused one foot of steel bar in my building, it means that I am saving the energy that would have been spent in extracting, processing, transporting another 1 foot of steel bar to be used in my building. But now we have a challenge around the use of materials and recycling within the construction sector still at the moment. First, we have limitations around standards. Certain materials, for example, I would give you a case. We have had many factories, companies that are now doing, plastics that are recycled. They are producing poles, members, like eco poles, you name them. Tiles that are made from recycled plastic. But you still find that many architects, QSS engineers, we would not specify these materials because our building code does not accept them. They are not in the standard. KEBS probably has not certified them on. So we need to do more advocacy to align our standards to encourage innovations to support actually uptake of those recycled materials. Number two, we need to rethink how we design our buildings. So while, for example, we were designing buildings, for example, a steel frame, I would give you a two case. You have a window, which is made of steel. To join the fixing in terms of building technology, to fix that window onto your building, there are many techniques you could use. You could either bolt it, you could either use a bolt to fix it, you could either, you could either weld it, or you could use other media. But I would just want to give an example with the difference between bolting and welding. Now, if you bolt that window onto your steel column, for example, or to whatever member of the wall, there is an ease of disassembly. When you want to move that window next time to reuse it, you can just unbolt it easily, and you will actually remove the window without really affecting the quality of that window, such that it is very easy to carry it and go use it into another building. Compared to somebody who welded the window, who will, you'll have to do unwelding, or you'll have to cut it, which makes actually the material not conducive for reuse. So when you're looking at materials, building materials, we need to also look at what technology do we use in actually building up our buildings. So as we encourage recycling, we encourage reuse, we encourage ease of disassembly. That is within materials. Now I want to come to quickly, because I can see my time is really running out, to the element of building management. I think Lombe was best placed to talk around building management as a services engineer, but I would give us a feeling to the extent that I can. Now, if we look at our buildings from a point of resource use, our buildings consume energy, our buildings consume water, and they consume, of course, materials, and in the process, they produce waste. Now, green buildings provides a paradigm, a way for us to manage these material flows effectively. So we'll start with energy. I've talked about energy used in the materials, but now let me talk about energy as a service within the building. We need energy to operate the building. We need energy for lighting. We need energy for powering, running the appliances, the equipment within the building. In cases we need this equipment, we need even running air conditioning if the cases are that we need actually AC in the building. We need energy to pump water. Now, when we are talking of efficiency, we have the option to think through what is the source of this energy. And I would not belabor the point that Lombe has raised, that we need to have ambition towards net zero. Net zero in the sense that how much practically possible is it for us to actually generate much of the energy we need for the building from within the site. In our context, this is very possible because we have solar energy potential, which is high. We can be able to optimize waste energy for repowering our building. Then water, we need to look, sorry, am I running out of time?
Yes. I just wanted to ask you to maybe summarize so that we can quickly get on our third speaker.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll do so in a minute or two. So okay. I was talking about the energy source. We need to look at using as much as possible renewable energy. Number two, we need to look at the efficiency of the fittings, both the electrical appliances we are using in the building, in running the building, but also for our use, whether it is the appliances like the fridge. And in Kenya now we have laws that are being enforced, the minimum performance appliances for fridges, air conditioners that are actually now forcing you to ensure that your appliances are efficient. Now water fixtures the same. We don't need to install like, you know, our toilets for those buildings that are old, which every time you go for a short call, you flush down 10 liters of water. Now we have plumbing fittings that you can flush as little as 3 liters. So we need to have water efficient fittings. We also need to recycle water so that, because when you recycle the water you have, it means we are reducing the energy demand for having to purify water and pumping to our building for the purpose of our use. And lastly, I would want to emphasize that we need to think through talking, raising more awareness, not in jargon, moving to scale and breaking the silos between the energy professionals doing their talking to engaging with not only the developers, not only the consultants, but working with Wanjiku. And with that, I wrap to bring the point that Lombe said from the beginning, that green building is not actually a new context in Africa. Let's rethink not to bring green building as a Western concept, but we go back to our roots, because the heart in my rural village that we lived in was the most green building that we had on earth, but we abandoned it to embrace mass-produced concrete blocks and mabati that is not necessarily well designed and built. So how can we get back to our roots to support green building so that it's not just elitish high-end clients in urban areas, but even Wanjiku can be able to appreciate the concept of green building and restore that high-quality building that was their heart while still feeling modern and really civilized. That would be the challenge for our practitioners to take forward to make the green building a reality for all, rather than an exclusive thing for some few elite people within the country or within Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nickson. Very insightful and in-depth conversation. So cost, time, and quality are the important aspects we need to still consider in making the whole life cycle of green buildings viable. That's where green buildings actually perform better than other standard or traditionally built buildings. And this is not a new concept. We just need to step back. We have seen green buildings before, as you have alluded. But then this is a concept that should be widely adopted, especially from the urban environment. And with that, we move to the third topic of the day, which are steps that the commercial sector in Africa can take to reduce or reverse the impact of climate change. Our guest speaker is Dr. Angela Mwanda, who is an environment, social, and governance consultant. So a bit about Angela is that she is an experienced environmental, social, and sustainability consultant with a demonstrated history of working in the environmental services industry. She is skilled in sustainable development, environmental and social impact assessment, environmental awareness, community engagement, proposal writing, and management. Dr. Angela is an empowered professional with a Doctor of Philosophy focused on environmental management from the Wageningen University in Netherlands. Dr. Angela, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. So I think it's been a very interesting experience participating in these webinars, and more so today. I love the way the examples have been brought down to Africa. So my presentation today will now take us a bit more into a focus section, and that is the commercial sector in Africa, keeping in mind that it has been acknowledged that the largest contributors to increased global greenhouse gas emissions, and that is according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, are businesses, factories, and other commercial facilities. So now we've moved from the domestic, the household level, to the commercial level, keeping in mind the amount of energy that is used, the materials that are used, if it's transport and logistics, the movement of humans, you know. So this definitely scales it up to another level. So what I will do is I will keep it very brief, and I will basically just highlight a few points that will provide guidance to how the commercial sector can reduce or reverse the impact of climate change. And the very first point has to do with carbon footprint measurement. So with footprints, whether they're ecological, environmental, in other words, the wider environmental or the carbon footprinting, you basically greenhouse gas emissions. So this is for what you are doing, your core operations, as well as your supply chain. So Nickson already talked about the tiles in Kenya that are very popular in the houses, as well as larger buildings. You also find them in a lot of the offices. If you just think of the distance they have traveled, the miles, that definitely contributes to the greenhouse gas emissions. So any company that wants to deal with imported materials definitely has a larger footprint, because you ask, where are they sourcing the materials from? So that person whom they're sourcing the materials from, was it a direct sourcing or was it an indirect sourcing, meaning there is now another third-party supplier? So you ask yourself about all those things. If it is a transport and the logistics, you also ask yourself, okay, to what extent are you managing the emissions in your supply chain and your transport and logistics? So basically looking at the carbon footprint, that has to do with saying, okay, this is a corporation, this is a company, we're an industry, we're either manufacturing, we're distributing and supplying. How can we reduce the mileage and the carbon footprint that we have? The second step has to do with the reducing of energy consumption. So I will not go too much into that, because I think that has been very well explained by both Lombe and Nickson Otieno. In other words, this has to do with identifying methods that help you reduce your energy consumption. So at the wider level, it's the green buildings, and that is our main topic for today. And then at the smaller level is actually the consumption of the energy and how you are going to save on it. So as I said, I'll not get too much into that. Then the third one, which I find very interesting, is to identify which renewable energy sources we have, and that can be used. So if we look at Kenya and also Africa, there's quite a bit of move right now towards the solar energy as a renewable source of energy. So for lighting, basically for lighting, if I can put it that way, and powering appliances. I know there's also been a bit of issues about some of the materials that are used in the solar panels. So that is something that would also need to be considered. But nonetheless, there is quite a bit of innovation regarding the solar panels and the different materials that are used. So solar panels are just one thing. And I know in Kenya, for example, it's now a government requirement that when you are establishing a building, a certain proportion of your energy should be obtained from renewable energy, and preferably solar panels. So that is already happening. Now you look at also other sources of energy. There is the wind energy. We have also the geothermal. In Kenya, we are very, how do I say that, advantaged to have that. So in other words, the question you always ask that, yes, you are a commercial entity, you are using quite a bit of energy. To what extent can you make the energy consumption a bit more sustainable? In other words, by using renewable sources of energy. Again, renewable sources of energy, you would need to maybe, if I can, I'm looking for a good word, to analyze the best sources for your use. Then the next point would have to do with reducing waste and fighting obsolescence. So if I can just explain what obsolescence is, many of the products we have nowadays are built to only last for a certain period of time. So what happens is that, for example, you have your phones, you have your other bigger machines, the production machines in the factories, and they're built to last maybe 5, depending on the level of activity you're having, maybe maximum, some of them 10 years. So especially the more recent models, because you still go into factories and find that some of the machines they're using are from the 80s, the 1980s. But the more recent models are built to only last for a short time. So usually what happens with such a case, if you want to fight obsolescence, is try and use the machine as well as possible. In other words, be careful about it, talk about the proper use, talk about maintenance, talk about repair of equipment. But in terms of reducing waste, look at the products that are being produced by companies. Look at even the design. So we get into the life cycle approach, the sustainability approach. Are you already in building into the products you are making a lot of waste? Is it the packaging? Is it, just small things? Yes, there is a consumer appreciation and all, but that is something that has come up a lot in the sustainability circles and the life cycle approach on how to reduce waste, because the waste from an industry, definitely in a commercial enterprise, is very high. But if you take it down to the consumer level, and this is what is being produced from the industries, then you find that it maximizes and maximizes. And we know that right now, globally, we are really dealing with this. I mean, now the race is all about how are we going to recycle our waste? How are we going to reuse our waste? So starting from the commercial sector, the key important thing here is how can a commercial entity produce less waste? So that's something that definitely comes up very clearly for all. Then another key sector, or another key area where commercial enterprises can really help in terms of reversing the impact of climate change, and that has to do with the optimization of transportation and logistics. So we know that transportation is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gas emissions globally. I mean, there are a lot of studies. When you look at even the highways, there are even measurements that are taken, and that's really there. That's already documented. If you talk of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide emissions, I mean, really, when you localize them to the transport highways, that's where they're usually greatest. And that is why we also know that buildings that are usually right next to the highways, especially residential buildings, suffer quite a bit or significantly from the indoor pollution. And that is directly attributable to the transport systems and the highways. So keeping in mind that, again, we are talking about the industries and the commercial enterprises, transport and logistics is a key thing for them. I mean, yes, you have produced, you developed your product. How are you going to get them to the consumers? So what is usually required and what is usually recommended is figure out the most carbon neutral or most pollution or least polluting methods to transport your product. So one of them is usually the shipping. But that has to do with quite a bit of planning, and that is actually what is required. That if you know you're going to ship your product by high seas, then work backwards and see how are you going to incorporate that into your planning. Then also, if you're going to work with transport fleets, it makes more sense to go with suppliers that, for example, have more energy efficient vehicles. Also, the fact that they maybe have larger storage so that you move fewer times. Then that is for the product. If I move to the other section, which is also of employees, that has to do with, are you going to organize company transport? Maybe one vehicle to bring your employees to the site of operations. We already see that happening quite a bit with the construction workers, and that is of necessity in the sense that the number of workers who are moved every day are very many. But then the question comes in, what about the larger corporations, which you'll have the managerial level, the high management, top management, middle management, then with the shop floor staff. People are coming from all diverse areas in the country, whichever country of operation. And everyone wants to find out the most convenient way for them to travel. So that becomes a bit of a challenge for that commercial enterprise to determine how they're going to get their employees at the end of the day to work, because each and every one of those employees coming to the workplace using different means is going to definitely contribute to climate change. So again, back to the transport. Things like combined transport or hiring of transport, like the buses, company buses. That is already happening quite a bit, and that's a positive move. Another one is the use of public transport to the extent possible. So those are some of the options that are explored to optimize transportation. Then another step that the commercial sector can take to reverse the impact or reduce the impact of climate change is to choose green infrastructure and equipment. That has already been alluded to by Nickson as well as Lombe, in the sense that there is a lot of equipment nowadays, a lot of and the buildings also, because the buildings, the green buildings can be termed as the green infrastructure. So there is already a lot going on, but again, as was mentioned very nicely and in quite detail by Nickson, is how is that incorporated into the design of the buildings, the design team, you know? So to what extent is that implemented? So the question now would be, okay, you are developing a commercial building. Who are you working with? Huh? Are you going to incorporate green infrastructure? And if I come into the equipment, so depending on what you are putting together, are you going to, for example, look at the use of solar systems? If you have heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems, are you going to consider the more energy efficient ones? And basically other energy efficient equipment, especially that which requires heating or mobility, in other words, moving parts that require more energy. So if again you scale it up and look at any commercial enterprise, just one small modification, if I can put it that way, really makes a big difference simply because of the scale. Huh? Another one is about the suppliers. Another step is about the suppliers, and specifically to choose sustainable suppliers. In other words, those who demonstrate good environmental practices. In other words, you look at a supplier and ask, is this supplier willing to work towards sustainability? Is this a supplier who says that they sustainably source their materials? They look at the most sustainable means of either maybe pre-preparing them for you for your production process. Do they look at the most sustainable means of transporting the raw materials to you? Then you also look at some of the certifications they might choose to have, including the corporate social responsibility certifications. So it goes down right to your supply chain. Are your suppliers aware, cognizant, and actively doing something to ensure that their activities are sustainable and hence also reducing the impact of climate change? Then you also look at promoting environmentally friendly ways of working. COVID, this current pandemic that we're going through, has been said to be one of the ways that have really reduced the impact of our activities on climate change. Look at how much global travel has, and look, most of the global travel is for work. We know that, because if you're talking of leisurely travel or your annual leave and your annual holiday, I mean, that happens once a year. But what are you doing the other 10 months, 10, 11 months of the year? Yeah, if you're working and it involves a job where you travel globally, like almost every month, because I do know some people who really travel quite a bit. So it's to ask yourself, how can you promote environmentally friendly ways of working? So video conferencing is one of them. Look at what we are doing now. Then, and I know a number of companies are also doing this, and that has to do with reducing the paper consumption, for example, especially in communication. So you now work more with emails, you know, and memos, those type of things. So in other words, environmentally friendly ways of working, your day-to-day working, the main contributor in terms of global transport and carbon mileage, because we already see that the big like the bigger airlines are already talking about this, is how to, by the time you get your ticket, they're already measuring for you the carbon miles. Then now the question comes up to you, right? So how are you going to work again to reduce your carbon miles based on the ones you have accrued from the travel? So in more environmentally friendly ways of working to reduce the impact of climate change. The last 2 points have to do with raising awareness. And that means that you talk about sustainability and climate change issues, you raise awareness among your employees, clients, and other stakeholders. So in other words, as a corporation, are you known for promoting sustainability? Are you known for promoting climate change? These are things that could also get into your annual reporting. We know the annual sustainability reports over and above the financial reports. So for example, in Kenya, this is not a legal requirement, but I know in countries like South Africa, and especially in listed countries, countries that are listed on their stock exchanges, in other words, that type of reporting is there. So we talk of environmental, social, and governance reporting, as well as sustainability reporting. So that raises awareness, because at the end of the day, there are certain big players who will only want to be associated with other commercial enterprises that demonstrate that in terms of the environmental, social, and governance aspects, that they are doing something. There is also a major risk of reputation if you become a major commercial enterprise and you are associated with negative activities that impact greatly on either climate change and or pollution. Then the final one has to do with mobilizing for climate change. And that means that companies at the end of the day realize that they have a huge influence on society, on trend. They use that influence to mobilize change. And change could even include relevant regulations. So, for example, in Kenya, we have a very good example of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. So bringing together different levels of manufacturers, both large, mega, as well as small, to influence change, to push regulations, so that at the end of the day, you're not only doing good business, but you're also ensuring that you're not negatively impacting or literally destroying the environment. So with that, I come to the end, and thank you very much. I look forward to questions later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angela. Those are some very interesting points around the steps that the commercial sector can take to reduce the impacts of climate change. And for me, I think I would just have a couple of questions, but then I will field them also when we open the Q&A session. So for now, I would just like to reiterate once more that our chat section is open, and feel free to add in any questions that you've thought of or that have sprung in your mind through the conversations of our three speakers. And so that when we open the chat section, at least we can have a look at those questions, and the experts in the room can address them live. For now, I will call upon Carol to help us launch our first poll. I want to get a feel of the interest around green buildings in the House, as well as sustainability and climate change. So our first poll will be, what's your interest in green buildings? Please feel free to choose one of the options if you're simply here to learn more and understand more about the sector. If you have done any certifications or are doing certifications, if you are looking for projects, then you can also indicate the same. And the polls are usually a great way to gauge the audience in the room, as well as get a feel of how you interact with your colleagues or any other connections that you might gain from this meeting. So we have about 60% of you voted. Kindly put in your vote. We have about 15 or so seconds left before we close the poll session. Okay. So just a couple more people to put in their vote. What's your interest in green buildings? Okay, right. We can close the poll. At least show the results. Okay, so 83% of you. It's a relatively new topic and we would like to learn more. And 17% of you are actually looking for projects. So this would be interesting for you all to connect and even add in your questions if you might need any more information as to the kinds of projects that you're looking for or looking at. And those that are interested in asking more, it will be interesting to ask any questions to the experts now that we have them in the room. Okay, so let's launch poll number 2. Number 2 is, what's your practice in relation to commercial buildings? So this is just also to get a feel of the professionals in the room. Are you an architect? Are you a project developer? Are you in government or governance? Are you in certification of buildings or certification courses? Are you a financier? Are you a contractor? Are you a property developer? Just to get a feel of the audience in the room. Yeah. Okay, so we have about 50% of you voted. I'm now realizing we should have had an other category where you could specify in case you're not captured in any of these. But let us know about the closest one that fits to your portfolio. If it's all the way from architects, contractors, financiers, those interested in energy and environment, as well as certification and government. So we'll close the poll in about 2 seconds. Okay. Right, now we can display the results. Okay. So most of you are still in energy management, 65% actually. Others in environmental management, 35%. We have architects in the building. We have contractors, financiers, certification, as well as government, people from government bodies. Thanks for that. We will now proceed to address some of the questions that you might be having. Kindly put any questions you might have in the chat section, and we can address them here. So as we are still waiting for more questions to come in, right. There is a question I'm seeing here from Innocent. Innocent, is it okay if we turn on your video and maybe you voice out your question?
Video, not really. I can just do with the audio. Okay, thank you. So my question was relevant to energy efficiency, and my thinking has been that probably you find most project proponents are more interested in embracing renewable energy systems without first analyzing the volume of energy that probably they consume at the time, and maybe how they can be able to reduce that and ensure that even if it reaches a point where they have to embrace a particular system, then they do that from a point of information rather than just embracing a system because people are going green. So my question was, how are we able to help them understand the importance of understanding how they can be able to embrace practices such as energy efficiency, because before they can actually embrace the systems. Thank you.
Great. So this would be a question around how do we bring that awareness even before investing into a green building? How do we ensure that buildings have the correct maybe efficiency and performance before green investments are put in place? So would we have any of Nickson or Chilufya or Dr. Angela try and handle that? I think from an awareness perspective, from an education perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I think the biggest issue that you have in buildings is access to information. You'd be hard pressed to find any building that you go to that has got any kind of information just on, maybe you've got your electricity bill that tells you overall in a month how much you use, but where it's gone to in terms of whether it's your lighting, your heating and cooling equipment, the time of day, like a lot more detailed information. That's what would make it very easy to see. And that's a service that we provide and we do quite a lot of, where you go into a building and you realize that nobody actually turns the lights off. And just by doing that, you can save perhaps an additional 10% or 20%. So this lack of data leads to obviously a lack of knowledge on where your building energy use actually goes to. So then people don't see the potential that is there just from being able to leverage data. So what then happens is that a lot of times people, because you don't see the potential, then that means that you don't pursue anything. And then a renewable energy offset looks like the easiest and best thing. And the thing about the renewable energy offset is that it's very easy, because you know that if you generate X amount, you're going to reduce by that amount. But the fact that you could have spent maybe a quarter of the money and do something else and have the same or a better saving is then lost. So the biggest issue around what the question was is just the lack of data and the lack of awareness. So if you could have the information, those type of things would become much easier to do.
Yeah, maybe if I could add on to what Lombe has said, Lombe has talked more on the side of actually you have the building already built, but how would we build also the awareness on the other side, even at the design stage? As an architect, especially a green architect, what I emphasize to deal with my clients, and you need to present the value proposition to sensitize your clientele if they are not aware on what value they would be having from the options for energy efficiency. Even before you do the calculations for energy sources, renewable energy sources, you need to give them a comparison. Why is it cheaper for them in the long run to adopt a particular option of renewable energy as opposed to connecting to the grid? What is their return on investment? How long will they get? What is their payback period if they took any decision to invest in energy efficiency fittings as opposed to contemporary fittings, whether for the lighting or the equipment appliances? So these simulations need also to be done at the beginning. And of course, the challenge is sometimes that we have a clientele base that very much in a hurry, often sometimes don't appreciate the professional fee. So what my colleagues often do is that you will have the architect do the drawings quickly. In fact, in most cases, you'll find the mechanical and electrical engineers engage in the project very minimally at the last stage, because again, also their drawings are not even required for the mandatory county approvals. But what we do as we having more, architects who are embracing green buildings, we're having planners, we are having engineers who are embracing this. The first responsibility we have from the beginning when we are engaging on the project is to do very quick simulations to be able to project to the client the value proposition in terms of cost, how much the system would cost if it is higher, and what is the payback period, so that they are able to make a decision from the beginning when they have the facts at hand. And of course, once the building is done, as Lombe has rightfully said, we need to encourage more building information that is embedded in our building. And I remember I said that often we don't have consultants coming back to do post-occupancy evaluation of their buildings. That is an area that even us as a firm, we are seriously investing in to begin studying buildings. But also we need to have display of the information. We need building user guides. How many of you've gone to a building, rented a space, and you are told what your bills are, what is the systems that are installed in place? You don't know even what green building features are there, but even if they are there in that building. So we need to have more of also demand of the consultants to package their highly technical information. Clients, laymen don't want to understand how much kilowatts hours, all that, but that information needs to be synthesized in a format that it can be easily displayed, as Lombe was saying, for the public to really embrace. And then, of course, largely the longer run would be we need to also shift our training, how we train our professionals from environmental planner, EIA experts, so that they really push to the ultimate delivery of, transformation, not just piecemeal to earn a fee and comply with the NEMA license. Same with the architects on, and of course, eventually we'll be shifting from voluntary process to having some of these being required mandatory. Like now you're looking at water efficiency, you have the solar water heater regulations that require that you have, if you are consuming 100 liters per day of water, then it must be provided through solar water heaters. Or if you are consuming 1,800 kilowatt hours of electricity per year as a building, then you must actually invest in renewable energy options. So the more we are also having, mandatory requirements with regulations, also that would enhance into the awareness and pushing people to embrace. But before we get there is a role in the professionals like you and I who are in the room to really invest in sensitizing sensitizing our clients when we engage them and our colleagues when we are interacting with them, to break beyond the barriers of only us engaging ourselves. Let's engage with the public. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to quickly touch on that as well, is that there's still a very large role that gets played by existing buildings. So a lot of our work that we do is in simulation. But what you'll find is that if your simulation gives an output that seems that is too different to what the guys are used to, then it's very difficult for you to move further. But if you've got information from existing buildings, you're then able to work out how much of a reality that is. So a lot of the key information for change is sitting in the buildings that you have already. So we've got clients where we tell them that the electrical infrastructure that you need, not the energy, but like your connection to your council needs to be half of what you are paying for at the moment. And the problem is that the electrical engineer is not going to believe that, because every single building he estimates the same. But if you were to go back and then you say, here's 100 buildings, and none of these buildings have ever gone above this number that you're estimating. So bringing all of that full circle is going to be important. And unfortunately, I think over the years, we've seen that the theoretical aspects, they're great for pushing things along and everything. But if that looks like it's too forward thinking or it's too progressive, then the people doing the designs and things are going to still stick to very conservative estimates, because there are legal implications to undersizing an electrical cable to a building, you know? So that's why, I mean, for us, our focus is very, very significantly on the on existing buildings, and using that data to then inform design, to inform simulation, and all of that.
Yep. Thanks for that. Yeah. So would we have any other questions in the comment section? All right. Okay. I've seen an interesting comment from Jared. Jared, you want to elaborate a bit further?
There. Hi there. Yeah. I'm saying I've experienced a very similar problem to what you guys are describing. And I come from a marketing background as well as an energy engineering background. And I see this problem as a sales problem. When you approach people that don't really love what we do, let's be honest, no one likes paying a consultant to give them numbers. When you approach them like that, people don't care. But solar, people care about. People love solar. Like I could sell solar to anyone. We could all sell solar to anyone because there's a love of solar. So perhaps we all should do some marketing and sales training and make people love energy efficiency, love the environment, love paying less. And once they believe in what we're doing, then selling our stuff becomes pretty easy. And that's the missing thing. We keep giving our clients great numbers and great spreadsheets, but that's not what they care about. So perhaps we just need to change our approach.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation, that actually it has to be a little balanced on the non-technical side, because at the end of the day, we need people in these buildings. We're not just drooling around the technology and the performance, but we need to attract more attention, public attention to these buildings. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting.
Maybe if I could comment on that. Yeah, it's a very interesting point Jared is bringing up. Yeah, that is true, that we need to, of course, largely we are trained as technical people to market technically. But then we need to have that soft skill of really marketing. But again, having said that, from my personal experience, I would say the point that Lombe raised is very important, that you have, facts that are based on actually existing case. I give you a case. A client comes to me and I advise him a design. First, what they want to see, can I see your, would you share with me, examples of your previous projects? I'm not even talking about green building. That is just contemporary design. People want to see, not many of us want to be the guinea pigs. That is the reality. They want to see where this has really worked. And so when they look at your design, or probably they get a word of mouth, somebody is really talking about this nice, that gives them a big case. So when can we build more cases, pilot cases? And if you're looking at the trajectory for those who are within Kenya, the growth about adoption of green building, largely by the commercial sector, it is about the business case. They have seen it work here. Their competitors are already reaping the benefit in terms of the savings, the brand value. So they definitely go into it. But you don't have, the challenge actually would be more with the private sector, because not the private sector, but the residential sector, because we don't have as yet as many cases. And so we need to build actually also a critical mass around there. And the other part that has not been also dealt with, the government. The government is also a huge developer. Now, government challenge with the government, it is not just the money, because these people and, you know, our African leaders, they don't mind wasting public resources, the taxes. So the cost is not a big issue to them. But the key issue for the government is there a policy framework? Has it been articulated? The benefits, have they been packaged and a document published? So that is why, you know, the stakeholders around the green building in Kenya and more are working towards, we need to really work collectively to push towards having green building policies, strategies that are embedded in regulations and policy framework. So the government itself can begin to adopt this. And I give you a very good case where you're having the current, you know, State Department for Housing embracing green building as one of the key innovating principles for the delivery of affordable housing, where in the mandatory tender documents that they are sending out to the contractors who will design, build, finance, operate the housing units they intend to put up, are required to provide in their proposals the solutions for energy efficiency, for sustainable waste management in their tender as one of the qualifying criteria. So we need to push such initiatives to have more model cases, practical projects, and of course borrowing from the past projects that are contemporary, not green, but also having good examples across the scale, not only biased to a certain sector like the financial sector, but within all sectors. Let's have cases for learning institutions, for healthcare facilities, you know, for the private sector and the government, so that we are able to encourage people to see, believe, feel, and really adopt. So, and in the professional responsibility, what Lombe mentioned, that is where associations like AAK need to do more and engaging the regulators, those who are regulating the registration and practice of engineers, architects, the IAK, Borax, so that they are able to, you know, embrace these emerging requirements and redesign actually the practice notes and guidance that the consultants have to adhere to embrace these new emerging actually mode of practice. Thank you.
Hi, Warren.
Oh yeah, please.
Hi, I had a question to Dr. Mwenda, if I could kindly pose it now. Okay.
That's okay.
So my question is, we have all given, she has given such a collective steps on which we can take to make the commercial buildings more green. And my question is on how we can focus more on the residentials. We have, with COVID-19, more people are working from home, more of us, most people are now, the loads and the energy loads are now shifting to the homes. How then, what steps can we take to have our homes more green? I mean, yes, we have the solar water and we have solar panels picking up, but how well can we, what steps can we collectively take to also have the residential homes green as well?
I know Dr. Angela was meant to step out shortly. Let's just see.
And of course, I'll not be able to do it as comprehensively as the architects and Lombe would do. But from a social perspective, a social and collective perspective, the first thing would be to find out, okay, so most of the people who are in residential either own the buildings or rent the buildings, but actually a larger number rent the buildings. So to find out from the owners of the building or the developers, what exactly can be done or what steps would be taken.
Okay. We still have Dr. Angela on the line. All right. Okay. So.
Hello, sorry, I think I got cut off. I think I got cut off a bit. Hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So in response to the question, I think for you to approach also the building, especially if you're in a residential development, ask what are their plans and maybe even make concrete suggestions. If it's electricity consumption, figure out, okay, how can the bills go down a bit? Because I know there are a lot of plans for that, and I will not get into that because I know we have the engineers who are specialists in that. If it is a matter of installing the solar heating systems, so approach them on that, because especially if you're in a rental building, then that is a capital heavy investment that you as a tenant would not want to get into. But what would be so critical here is what the question that I would ask of you is, what is the benefit to them? Because sometimes I have seen that the landowners or the house owners, developers also, would ask, so why should I invest in something that is so, that is so capital intensive? So it's to determine what's the business for that. And I think the experts that we had today with Lombe and Nickson, they would definitely even help you build up a case to say, okay, this is going to be the benefit not only for us as the tenants, but you as the owners. I totally agree that in terms of residentials, most people are working from residentials, but again, the question is, to what extent can you influence the owners or the developers of the buildings to put in place more energy efficient measures? So I present more the soft. Maybe I would ask the engineers and the architects in the house to assist a bit more with that.
Maybe if I could comment just to add on what Mwenda has said, Dr. I think the residential, there are two factors. There is the rental residential and owner residential. So as Dr. Mwenda says, when you are a tenant, particularly for existing buildings, you may be having limitations because of your tenancy agreements. And I think one of the areas that to look at, begin raising awareness around with the facility managers, estate managers, even to begin looking at our lease agreements. Because if I invested, for example, in retrofitting my lighting systems to have more efficient LED systems, do I have even sub-metering? Probably, because you want to look at that building level point, probably whether you will have that benefit as a tenant to take the initiative to change your dwelling. But also, I just mentioned sub-metering. If now the developers are doing the design, the new and upcoming developments will have to be designed. If you're looking at apartments, we need to make the tenants have that incentive to take an initiative towards energy efficiency and sustainability. So simple things like net meter, instead of having a centralized metering where everybody, like you are paying a bill, you don't know, like Lombe had said, if you knew every month your bill is this much, 3,000 Kenya shillings you're paying to Kenya Power, and if you knew you are saving, you would save actually a bill of 1,000 shillings every month by making certain energy efficiency investments. That gives you quite an incentive. Even though you are going to stay in the house for 2 or 3 years, you can tell you've already recovered your investment, as opposed to if all that bill you're paying, and if whether people are wasting the resources, it doesn't matter to you, whether water resources or energy resources, even waste management. You look at how we are managing our waste, organic waste that are coming from the facilities. For now, it is a menace. Our farm currently, we are actually working on a technology that we're proposing to convert organic waste into electricity, both biogas and electricity for consumptions within the building. Now, if you have such initiatives where even the tenants know I'm spending this much in my organic waste, and can I sell my waste? Can I recover money from them? So we need to begin looking at the design not only of the building, where everything from plumbing for water, for electricity, all services are centralized, to we begin having them decentralized in terms of management, but not decentralized in terms of the technical design. And also we look at the softer part of the management. We need some awareness among the facility managers, estate managers, caretakers, so that they embrace some of these initiatives and the energy efficiency measures that we put in place. But at the personal residential unit, I think we have a good opportunity, because that one would be the role of the professionals involved, from the planners, architects, engineers, to sensitize them at the beginning and show them practical cases from existing buildings that it is actually, there is a value for them to make such decisions while they're building their new residential houses, or when they're constructing the apartments for sale or for rental. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nickson. Great. I think I had one more question, which probably I can direct this to Chilufya also. What will it take for African governments to really advocate for green buildings? We've seen other environmental moves like bans on plastic. We've seen logging bans being put in place. But then what would be the idea of getting these governments to unanimously, or at least push for more adoption of green buildings in various countries?
Okay. I think it's really simple, and I think it was Jared who mentioned it earlier, that this is all, I guess, a marketing exercise, and part of marketing is getting your message across to someone in a way that they can appreciate in order for you to make a sale or whatever it is. So African governments, I think there's a lack of understanding on the benefits, and it's, I guess, for us as professionals in the industry to be able to put the message across so they can understand it. An example, when we were working on the Building Energy Efficiency Code for Nigeria, we did a case study, and one of the ministry buildings, someone wanted to donate some money to put in a solar system for them, right? And the solar system was going to cost a certain amount of money. And that case study, I think, was probably the first time they actually saw really the power of energy efficiency, because we showed them how the existing building they had, based on their bills and the current, was that if we applied the requirements of the code, meaning that we did the energy efficiency retrofits, that the cost would have been maybe 20% of the cost of putting in a new solar system, and then be able to save them the exact amount as what it was going to offset them. In fact, it came at a saving, because if they implemented all of the features that were within the code, they would actually be able to sell one of their generators. And so the additional money that they were going to spend was going to be covered by selling one of the generators. So I think if we can sell to African governments the fact that energy efficiency in particular, let's not say green buildings, because green buildings means a lot of things, but specifically energy efficiency, is that what energy efficiency can do is that it can make you do a lot more with your existing infrastructure. So if you've got a country where you've got a 100 megawatt capacity, with energy efficiency, because you also have a reduction in power, you could build, instead of building 100 new homes and not be able to, and not have to update your country infrastructure, you could maybe build 200. And I think that's the message that on the benefits that is hard to sell. We don't want to necessarily sell green buildings to them. We need to sell the fact that with what you're doing with what we've got right now, we can do 40% more without having to increase your capacity. So I think it's just the way that message comes across.
Right. All right. Yeah, thanks for that, Chilu. Lynette, are you still in the audience?
Yeah, yes, I am. I think my question relates to what Liz was asking about, and we can see that a lot of people are also going back post-COVID-19. They're going back into offices, and offices are having to be redesigned to have some special, to have some social distancing between people. What are some of the things that we can add in terms of green buildings in the redesign of buildings, as landlords now or employers now focus on redesigning to ensure that there is social distancing? What are some of the things that we can ask them to also include as they redesign buildings to make them a little more greener? Back to you, Warren. I don't know who you'll direct it to.
Maybe briefly, if I can comment on that. Probably, Lynette, I would personally extend your conversation beyond social distancing to ensure return to safer, healthier buildings. So the whole conversation is around how do we design our buildings to be healthy, to be safe places to live in and work, beyond the social distancing. Of course, there would be a lot of interior retrofitting in terms of repurposing our spaces, of course, considering the number of people we are accommodating. But the larger conversation, which actually is a big case for the green building, because around the green building agenda, we have a whole category, a whole area emphasizing healthy indoor environments, or indoor air, indoor environment quality, depending on how you want to look at it, which is largely looking at what kind of materials you are using, their finishing levels, the quality of the air you are breathing in, you know, the quality, that quality in terms of temperature, in terms of, you know, the concentration of pollutants and all that conversation. So as we go back, we need to relook at our buildings as places that are healthier and safer to live in, both from performance in terms of the systems we are designing, the energy efficiency systems, water efficiency systems, but also in terms of the materials that we are choosing for those buildings. So a good case, I think, post-COVID for me, green building is going to be actually more popular because green building already advocates for healthier spaces for living. But in terms of the intricacies of the details, that would apply per project, because the uses would be different, the needs would be different, the spaces would be different. So, of course, the consultants will have to be engaged to provide actually customized solutions. But the overall principle is to return to healthier and safer places to live and work in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nickson, for that. So that's been an engaging session. I think that's where we'll close the Q&A for now. Just briefly summarizing, we've talked about an overview of green buildings in Africa. We've highlighted some of the major barriers and even actionable steps that can be taken towards promoting or adapting more green buildings. And as well as looked at the impacts of climate change and how green buildings can contribute positively to us mitigating the effects of climate change. So we have a final poll that we can launch just to get a feel of from the audience which sorts of building segments you think will have the biggest opportunities for green opportunity, will have the highest potential for green opportunities. So which two building segments, at least from the conversation we've had, will represent the highest potential for green opportunities? You can pick any two that you feel like either you've interacted with or you find there's a lot of potential. Because there is an increasing interest in different residential or real estate sectors, and they've been listed out, ranging from student housing, offices, warehouses, even government buildings represent such a huge opportunity. But which, in your opinion, would probably represent the best case for energy, for green opportunities, for green buildings, for sustainable buildings? Okay, so we'll close the poll in about 10 seconds. Kindly put in your vote. Which two sectors you think will work? And yes, that's where we'll close the poll. Thank you for that. So we can display results, and rightly so. It's actually the office space which could present one of the biggest opportunities, closely followed by residential estates, as well as factory buildings. Not to forget, there's also hotel and resorts, which can also be a huge potential, especially for countries with tourism and travel sectors. Right. So we are now winding up the event. The roundtable has been quite insightful. I would just want to request that we get a group photo from this conversation as a way of remembering what we have talked about, as a way of remembering the gathering that happened here today, and just for you to also keep memories of this activity. So I'll introduce, I'll bring on Ruth to guide us on this group photo before finally we wind up the event. So Ruth, welcome.
Kindly enable your videos so that I can take a screenshot. Kindly enable your videos. Okay, I'm still waiting for a few people. Okay. Can smile at least.
You're gonna give a countdown?
Yes, I'll do a countdown. Can smile at least. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Smile, smile, please, everyone. Again.
You're not smiling.
Okay, I'm moving to page 2. Please smile, everyone. Okay, thank you, Warren. Back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I know we are 2 minutes past time, so I'll make this a little quick as we are winding up the conversation. As a way to wind up this, this interactive session we've had today, we've talked about sustainable buildings and identified the barriers as well as possible ways of mitigation. We've talked about the commercial space, we've looked at the residential, and even certifications that go around this green building transition. So the next steps for us would be, as professionals, it doesn't just stop here about talking, but it's all about action. So we're also going to put together a report of this event to map out all the points that have been raised by you and share them with you so that you can also forward this to your other networks and hopefully begin the process of either advocacy, education, and really action in your own little way. So thank you so much, number one, to the speakers, Dr. Angela, Nickson, and Chilu. You have provided us really great insights and experiences. So we are really deeply grateful for your contribution. To our moderators and note takers, that's Liz, Lynette, Julie, Karen. We appreciate your help in the background, doing all the hard work. To the technical team, that's Ruth and Caroline, who have helped us launch these polls and all the technicalities. We are also very grateful to you. To our partners, that's Arif Energy and Innovators. We also want to thank you for your continued support thus far. And even as we move forward, we look forward to your engagement and your continued support. Finally, to each one of you who managed to put the time to attend this webinar or this roundtable, we appreciate your contribution and your initiative in vouching for a sustainable Africa. So I'll now welcome for our closing remarks. I don't know if we have Kathy on the line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Warren. So I think Warren has given a really good set of summary, but I just had a few, shall I say, final comments. And like you said, thanks again to everyone on behalf of ARIA, innovators, and all of our partners for joining. I think two very interesting things that were mentioned. I think one by Nickson is just about localizing all of these aspects, whether it's the green buildings, the energy efficiency, and the climate change to our local conditions. So he gave a really interesting example about, I think, the building, VPAC towers. So just about looking at all of these aspects in terms of how can we support local materials, and just putting a local spin on everything, really. And I think Angela, in as much as there were a lot of components around green buildings, I think Dr. Angela gave a very interesting point, just in terms of tying in, climate change as well as energy efficiency. So when you speak to, say, technicians in factories or people in any number of industries, there isn't really a focus on things like packaging. For marketing, for instance, do we need X number of plastics or any number of materials to be included in packaging? Can some of those things be trimmed out so you're only using what you need? And as well as, say, operations and maintenance for factories and things like that. And I think it's really around thinking, not just doing something for certifications. I think like Lombe also mentioned, but it's really going back to the basics and asking from the design thinking, really focusing on the sustainability aspect. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for those few words. And so please mark your calendars on Friday 16th of October 2020. We shall be having our final roundtable before the official conference from 21st of October. So that's about 3 or so weeks. 16th of October, we'll be having our final roundtable. Details of this roundtable will be in your inboxes in our subsequent communication. So thank you so much. I hope you're now walking away with knowledge and even networks to move the industry forward. We shall then be ending the meeting in about just a couple of minutes, 2 minutes. So finish off any pending conversations you might be having, as well as you may now leave at your own pleasure. So thank you and have a good afternoon.